Parents and educators, and welcome to the next edition of Kurt's Kitchen Table Ed Talk. I am here today with Ms. Phyllis Wolfram. She is the Executive Director of MOCASE, the Missouri Council of Administrators of Special Education, and also the President of the Missouri CASE. She has a long and distinguished career. I believe she just retired after 35 years in the public schools. But Phyllis, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your journey in special education.
So I will, and thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and talk about special education. As you've just said, 35 years, so it is a huge passion of mine and will continue to be. So I will make one point of correction. I'm not the MOCASE president, but I am the national CASE president. And just as first, I'll be working with Missouri CASE and their directors as their executive director and helping coordinate services and programs throughout the state. So I'm very excited about that. Let's see. So that's my current position, really. I enjoy working on the CASE board, especially with colleagues from across the nation. We have so many similarities as we implement the IDEA, yet we have so many differences as it's such a complex law. Our school attorneys tell us it's the most complex federal law on the books right now, and that makes it very difficult for administrators and for teachers. And hopefully, as we continue to do our work as administrators and in our professional organizations, we can help make that easier and do even more training around that. So that's where my passion is. Mm-hmm.
Well, very good. Can you tell me what inspired you to go into special education, and in particular to become a leader within the field of special education, particularly at a national level?
Mm-hmm. I've been asked that question before, and I don't have this big, remarkable story of an individual with a disability that really impacted my life or in my family. But I had a college professor that was a special ed director when I was doing undergrad, and I wanted to be a teacher. I had great teachers, coaches when I was in high school. So special education, I think from her influence, she was so passionate about it, and I did practicums and interns, and it just became my love. And as I moved into that role and was teaching, I had an opportunity to work under some great leaders, some great directors, some great principals who encouraged me into the field of administration. So that's kind of how I ended up where I did. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Now, I know an ongoing issue within the field and a concern at the national level is the shortage of special education teachers and special educators in general across the country. Can you give me some sense of what we can do or how we can encourage this next generation to go into special education?
Mm-hmm. I think that I think what you need to do, Kurt, is this big, huge, major campaign on how great it is to be a special educator.
I like that.
We've talked about that off and on in my professional groups and with my colleagues. But it is a great profession. It is so rewarding. So I think that we don't do a good job of tooting our own horn. I don't think we do a good job of getting out there and saying, this is a great profession, and here's all the reasons why, and here's why you need to be a part of it. So I really think that we need to move toward this national campaign on how great it is to be a special educator, and even an educator in general, because we seem to, in our own field, we know the great work that's going on. We see what our colleagues are doing. We're walking into classrooms. But not always do we get that good rep from our legislators who aren't there every day, from sometimes our parents that aren't there every day. So I think it is incumbent upon us to really spread the word and talk about and show what a great job we're doing in public education.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. What would you say are the greatest challenges facing schools and districts right now with regard to special education? And just what makes it difficult today?
Yeah, I think the complexity of the law in and of itself, the fact that it's so complex makes it litigious. And when we talk about legal issues, then we talk about one side or the other. And we become more split than we are joined. And I think that one of the things that we need to do in training our teachers and in training our administrators is, how do we collaborate effectively? How do we have really good conversations around this law that we're all trying our best to implement? And I think that we get defensive too fast sometimes in meetings, instead of just having those conversations. I think because the law is so regulated, we feel this huge need to make sure we do everything so perfect, because compliance. Mm-hmm. And we need to know compliance like we know our social security numbers, like we know our telephone number, like we know our address, those basic things we teach kids. That's our job to know. So because we know it so well, we need to walk into a meeting and meet with students and parents and have a great collaborative meeting and talk about the strengths of the child. I've had the opportunity recently to do some collaboration and conversation with the National Center on Learning Disabilities, and they work very closely with parents. And so one of our next initiatives is, how do we roll out talking more about strengths of our students with disabilities, and let that be the focus, and how we can build upon their strengths and not their weaknesses. So,
and you hit on some really important points there, Phyllis. And in the parent school relationship, and I know since '75 that's been a big focus. I know
yes.
CEC has continued to support the importance of building those relationships. What can schools do to help the parent feel more comfortable, particularly when there might be 12 very highly educated professionals sitting around a table and the parent is essentially alone? I know the intent is never to intimidate, but sometimes the outcome can be a little frightening for a parent. So what can schools do to help that?
Mm-hmm. I think I've said in a number of meetings where it seems like sometimes as educators, the first response is, no, well, we can't do that. Or that's not how we do it. When our first response should be, let's talk about that. How can we make that happen? What does that look like? How does that fit? And if we begin the conversation in that positive tone, because the parent has a reason for asking that question or bringing it up, or the teacher has a reason for bringing up an issue that needs to be talked about. So if we began that whole conversation in a very collaborative, open way, and not so legalistic from that regulatory compliance perspective, I think we would get a lot further down the road. But I also think that ties back into the teacher shortage. It ties back into the shortage of special education administrators, because I can easily sit here and say this, Kurt, I've been doing it 35 years. So I've made my mistakes, and they are many. So it's easier for me to walk into a meeting with all that history behind me and all that knowledge that I've gained from all the mistakes that I've made. But somehow we have to teach our administrators and our teachers how to work with all that regulatory language, how to work, we all know funding comes into play somewhere. How do you maneuver, and how do you pull all those things together with all your knowledge and make that meeting work and make it a success for the student? And that's not an easy task.
So help me, you mentioned the training piece and training principals, training educators. And I know just one very real challenge is there's so much today that districts are held responsible to do, whether it's safety training, fire drill training, RTI, 504, IEP, you go down the list.
Oh, the list is really long at the beginning of the school year.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of my questions is, I think most people recognize that we need to do more to support principals in becoming more knowledgeable, and administrators and being more knowledgeable to drive better IEP meetings. But at the end of the day, we also run into time constraints. And how can we, moving forward, is it carving out time? Is it getting more creative with online training? I mean, how do we move this forward?
Mm-hmm. There are so many hours in a day. So I think that prioritizing talking with those administrators, talking with those teachers. What are the priorities? What are their needs? And I think moving to a lot of online training, just what you're doing now. I mean, this is pretty spectacular. You know, you're sitting in one state, I'm sitting in another, and we're having a very detailed, in-depth conversation about our profession. And I think that we can do this with teachers and with administrators as we go down that path to say, one of the things that we know is that sometimes building principals become special ed directors. Sometimes classroom teachers come right out and become special ed directors, and their lack of knowledge is just not there. We need to provide an avenue by which they can go and get that themselves. They can go easily talk to another administrator, ask a question, and where they're comfortable doing it too. And so I think some of the online thing is where we've got to go. It's got to be convenient. It's got to be honest. It's got to be to the point. Their time is valuable, and they don't have days and days and days to go to week-long trainings. So we've got to find a way to really target what their needs are, and then to provide that in a very concise way.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate and have always appreciated about the Council for Exceptional Children, going back to my days as an undergrad student, is I feel like CEC has always tried to figure out how to support the folks in the trenches and how to figure out how to train, how to support. And of course, that's changed a lot with technology and what we have available. And I'm just encouraged knowing we have a professional organization that I believe truly cares about the learning of all those involved, and also their willingness to do it in a means that matches our needs today.
I would agree with you, and so this could be my shameless plug to anyone who listens. You should go to the CEC website, the Council for Exceptional Children, and see the numerous resources that are available, and join. And you should also go to the CASE website, the Council of Administrators of Special Education. And if you're of a particular categorical area that you need more training in, you can join the Division of Early Childhood. You can join the Higher Ed Division. There are 19 different divisions of the Council for Exceptional Children. They've got something for you. So there's my shameless plug. Thank you.
Well, and to follow up on that, having been involved with CEC since my undergraduate days, for those of you who may be new to the field, CEC is one of the main reasons we have IDEA. And, you know, we go back to Al Aitson and Fred Weintraub and Joe Ballard. These were the trinity of CEC leaders that really pressed for IDEA and contribute a lot of language. So CEC has a very long history of leading the field. Every expert in the field that I've read for the last 25 years is a member of CEC. So we need to support CEC. It's our professional responsibility, and I'd like to see principals, superintendents, folks in the gen ed community who serve our children to also join CEC so we can integrate more as a community.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree with you. Yes, totally.
That would be great. I wanted to ask you also about quickly the Andrew F. case and what you think potentially the impact could be and what schools need to maybe know moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Boy, that's such an interesting case. I remember when it first came out and I read it, and I read the findings. I said, well, there's really nothing there. I mean, I said to myself, we're already doing that. So for me and my school district and the colleagues that I were associating with in Missouri and at the national case level, I know that the language changed, and I know I think I read some articles that came out and said, oh my gosh, higher threshold for everyone. I think it was different language that might help us move forward to be a little more specific. But in my heart of hearts, Kurt, I believe that we are providing more than de minimis services to students across the country. I know we have pockets where we need improvement, but we have pockets of excellence in special education in every one of our schools. So I know there's a lot of talk about it. I have sat through session after session with attorneys giving information and telling us what we need to do. But I think when we talk about least restrictive environment. I think when we sit down and have honest conversations with parents, I think that we are already providing those services. And where we're not, we need to change. We need to. So I think for some, it will be a great opportunity to reboot and to continue to strive to improve in those services. And I think for others, they're already there. So I think the continuum of opportunity to improve is available for everyone. But I haven't seen it in my district and in my area here in Southwest Missouri that it has had a significant impact for change, because I believe we were already providing the appropriate services for students.
And I would concur with that as far as my observations, having worked in a number of different districts. The one thing I took away from it, though, is even when and where we've had great programs, we haven't always collected the data that if we were pressed, that we could prove that we had moved the child forward. And so as I've talked to district leaders and folks who have asked for my opinion, what I've said is just ensure a couple things. Ensure your goals are measurable from the beginning. Ensure you have a baseline, and ensure you have a legitimate tool for gathering, collecting, and measuring the performance over time. And so, because you could have the best program in the world, but if you can't measure it, that's where you would get hurt in a FAPE/LRE case that mirrors that of Andrew F.
You know, I think you are spot on. I think that if there is one thing that I have preached more heavily in the last 10 years of my career as a special ed director is data, data, data. And continued to have in-services where teachers brought their IEPs and you had to share it with a colleague. And can your colleague understand how to take data? And does your colleague, if no one else understands it but you, then it's not going to work really well. So I cannot agree with you more hardly on that point of data is probably some teachers are brilliant at collecting their data, and then there's some that really we have to improve upon. We have to be able to readily share that with our parents. What a great opportunity to walk into a meeting and to say, we are making such progress, and look, here's how I know we're making great progress.
Right.
Or to say we're not making progress, and here's why. Here's some things that need to change, and we need your help. And we've got to work together to make that change. So data, whether it's trending up or it's trending down, gives us direction. And it is by far the most important thing. And there's so many tools out there to help us do that now. I mean,
there is.
Yeah, I won't do a whole lot of shameless plugs right now. But I mean, yes, there are tons of them. Some are free, some aren't. But we just have to look, because it can be the easiest thing in the world to take data.
Well, you just gave me a great idea. Maybe at some other point we can do a follow-up and with yourself and maybe some other folks and talk about some of the great tools that are out there, or resources, free resources, because I think a lot of schools, let's say it's a child with a significant behavioral issue and you're looking for really good data tracking software that you can send home daily and track goals, but they may not be aware of what's really good and not. And it would be really fun to kind of have a round table with some other leaders who are aware of some really good stuff.
I think that's a great idea. Idea.
That'd be fun. All right. I have one last question for you. And since I have the national executive director here for the Council of Administrators of Special Ed, the one thing I really want to know is that I feel like principals, special ed directors, superintendents, as school administrators, you're often in a position to say no, and you can't always provide the reasons why. And I feel that special ed directors are often the ones that, if a parent's pressing hard, it's up against the special ed director. And there are a lot of variables that the parent is not aware of. There are a lot of variables that come into play. And so as you have spoken with special ed directors over the years, if they could speak to parents and say, I wish you knew this, either about the job or the role, their heart, what collectively would you say you've learned over time about directors of special education?
Mm-hmm. I think that those that are in this position, in that profession, it's their chosen line of work. And I would like to think that every one of them have a reason for doing that work. Whether they started as on the regular ed side or the special ed side or any other side, they're about children, they're about students, they're about our kids making progress and performing. And I think that sometimes we do get bogged down in the financial pieces and the money and the planning and all the meetings that we go to that aren't necessarily directly connected to students. But their heart is there for kids. And that if walking into an IEP meeting or to any meeting with a parent, you remain student-centered. You remain child-focused. I can tell you a story that it's many, many years ago working with a parent advocacy group. There was a trend going where the parent advocates and the parents would bring in a picture of the child and sit it right in the middle of the table so that the focus was on the child. And, at one point I thought, oh, that's so corny, and it wasn't. I mean, when you really think about it, you're there for this kiddo. So if you can put your energy into that and be honest, and I think honesty is always the best policy. And there is a way to talk about finances, and there is a way. You have to have the knowledge yourself as an administrator to be able to talk completely, clearly, and honestly. But if you don't have the knowledge walking into that meeting, that's where you get stuck. So you have to, as an administrator, you have to know, you got to have all your P's and Q's lined up walking in there and be comfortable dialoguing with parents. So I think honesty, being very child-centered, not being afraid to dialogue with that parent and say, how can we make this happen? Why do we need to make that happen? Is it the number one priority that we need to be focusing on? So I think if you're goal-oriented, you're targeted in your meeting, and you build that relationship, I think you'll be successful all the way around.
So one last question that you sparked here. One of the things I've seen over the years, and I think it goes back to good intentions, but maybe sometimes unintended outcomes, with the due process that was put in place to support parents in resolving issues, my concern is over the years, we have had a hair trigger reaction as parents and advocates to go into formal due process. And the intent of the law was never that, as I've spoken to a number of people who were involved in the development of IDA. And it was all about informal resolution at the lowest level as much as possible. And, the one thing I guess I'd like to encourage to any and all advocates who are watching this, and I assume you would support this notion that, and I guess I'm asking you, my sense is that all special ed directors are open to informal dialogue, resolution. If there is a disagreement on a placement or a setting, whatever it may be, before you trigger that due process formal approach, sit down with the educators, sit down with the special ed directors, and try and find the solution. Because in my opinion, going through the formal process does not help the child. Resolving and coming up with a good team-based approach is positive. But I'd love to get your sort of thought and opinion on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The minute you are involved in a due process hearing, what happens is you have sides. And, you have this side and that side, and you're not working collaboratively all on the same side. So I think the minute that we go down that path, our attorneys get involved, and there is a place for attorneys. We've probably heard all their jokes about why you do or don't want an attorney with you, but they do serve a purpose. But once we involve our attorneys, whether that is on the parent side or the school district side, it takes on a whole other approach, which is required for liability of the school district, or what parents feel is required to preserve something that they think they've lost. So it doesn't go well, and it's always, it becomes a very adversarial situation. So if we could move toward some really good sound dialogue with parents and educators prior to any filing of due process, and if it's bringing in a mediator, one that you agree upon, if it's bringing in another school district personnel that has some skills at facilitating conversation around where they need to go. Maybe it's a higher level of administrator who might feel more comfortable or more competent in making some of those decisions on behalf of the school district. Because sometimes I think that's where special ed directors kind of get caught. They don't feel as comfortable making some of those decisions as they should. So I totally agree with you that the whole heart and the spirit of the law was rooted in informal and providing those informal resolution and providing those safeguards for students. And I think there's a way to do it that doesn't have to get into a real litigious setting.
Very good. Well, and as we're wrapping up the interview, do you have any last thoughts, recommendations to directors of special education, parents, advocates, anything you'd like to share?
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that I would like to say, I think on the whole of special education, I'm very passionate about it. And I think that, as I said earlier, I've learned over the years, I put my foot in my mouth, I've stepped in holes, but I've pulled myself out. And I would like to challenge all special ed directors to continue to learn, all parents to continue to be open to dialogue and to come to the table for resolution. Don't come to the table for any type of battle. Come ready to talk about the good things that are happening in education, and give. Be willing to give and take as part of that facilitation and as part of that meeting. And I think I'll end with this. I think we have to be the yes, I can profession and not the no, I can't profession. And though we have limited resources, we have limited funding, we have to find a way to be the yes, I can people.
I love that. What a great note to leave on. Phyllis, I'm grateful personally as a special education advocate and special educator for your service, your work, your leadership. And it's just reassuring to me knowing your tone and approach and one of working with parents and coming together for the whole of the child. And I think that's a message that just needs to go out to our entire community, whether it be regular ed parents, regular educators, special educators. And I think that's a clarion call we can really all get behind. So thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Same here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, ma'am.